What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome back. We're here with some more DraftKings MMA DFS picks, lineup advice, and best bets for FanDuel as well. For UFC 299, we have Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera. We have Benoit Denis versus Dustin Poirier. 14 fights on this UFC 299 card. And we're here to break it down for you for betting and DFS, mostly DFS. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, huge card, man. Lots of big names, an exciting one for watching and for DFS.
Yeah, man, this card is wild. I mean, you'll hear that from everyone that's talking about it, but this is right there in contention with UFC 300 for card of the year for sure.
Absolutely, and maybe card of the past couple of years with all the names. And if you're a UFC fan, a mixed martial arts fan, you'll love seeing all the names on here. For us, we didn't have to do much charting or tweaking of the numbers this week since basically everyone is a veteran. So if you're new here, what we're going to do, break down the main events from a betting and DFS perspective. Yes, there are 2 5-round fights on this card. We will discuss the 2 newcomers. One's a veteran coming over from Bellator. Another one is a guy who has basically the same amount of octagon time that Jake and I have combined. And then we'll talk about the one other guy on the card who has less than 4 fights in the UFC, which is kind of crazy to think about. Normally that list is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 names long. Just one goes to show the depth of this card in terms of veteran fighting. And then I think because those segments are so short, we're going to go fight by fight briefly and just get a high level take from Jake on each fight. I know a lot of you asked for fight by fight breakdowns, and we'll try to condense that. And then we'll give you a fight that you have to target in DFS, our favorite underdog fantasy play of the slate, and our stream parlay of the week at the end. So make sure you stick around for that. This is a live Q&A, so make sure you ask questions throughout the show. We'll be here 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the number of questions that we get. We'll interrupt periodically to answer your questions. I see we got Patrick, Jayhawk, Edwin in the chat. What's up, fellas? Say hi if you're watching. If you're just lurking, just say hi. We appreciate that. And chat with other members in the chat here. So, Jake, I admittedly realized later than I probably should have that this was 2 5-round fights on this card with Denis and Poirier. Yet here we are. And you and I, we always talk about when we have these 2 5-round fight cards, what it means for betting and DFS. And if you have some numbers, we can go through that. If not, maybe we can just touch on it on a high level. And then let's go into the title fight, O'Malley and Vera. Your thoughts on that? So I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I think just real quick on the lineup construction, I think the most important thing is you want to play at least one of these 5-round fighters. Looking at the last 20 cards, there was only one instance where 0 5-round fighters were in the winning lineup on these multi 5-round fight cards. So I basically play 1 or 2. I wouldn't recommend stacking. I wouldn't recommend playing 0. So exactly 1 or exactly 2 in all your lineups. It's been pretty close as to what has won more between exactly 1 or 1 and 2, but you're going to get way less split when you play exactly 1. So keep that in mind if you're trying to get unique. And the constructions inside of that, if you're playing exactly 1, generally you want it to be a favorite. That's won 3 times more often than just playing 1 dog. So 30% of the 20 slates have just been a single favorite in the winning lineup. And if you're playing 2 guys, generally you want it to be a favorite and a dog. That is also won 30% of the time, opposed to 2 favorites, which gets really chalky when 2 favorites win and are in the winner. We've seen an average split of 34 ways, so probably want to avoid that. And when both dogs win, we've actually seen the split be an average of 19 ways, and that's only happened 2 times where both dogs were in the winner. One of those was recently. So, yeah, I would just avoid that too. Just play either a favorite and a dog or just a favorite in the majority to all of your lineups, and that's going to be the most plus EV way to approach slates like this.
Love that. And Patrick is in the chat. Patrick is in our Discord server, which, by the way, for those of you watching, if you're not, you can join in the description below. He did ask this morning in Discord. I missed it, Jake, but he's asking it again here. Does the fact that there are 14 fights on the card change your mind about only 1 5-rounder being the most plus EV approach? Meaning that there's so many lower owned fighters that we can get different with, that we can play 2, maybe even 2 favorites and get different. You have a lot of the data there, so I'm curious to hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I mean, let's just look at the last 14 fight cards that had 2 5-round fights on. So the last one was March 4th. It ended up being a favorite and a dog in the winner. It was only a 2-way split. So that's pretty solid. Before that, we had one. Before that, it was actually the one back on November 12th, 2022. And that was the one card where we had 0 5-round fighters in the winner. And that was actually the Adesanya Pereira card where Pereira scored like 92 points in a fifth round knockout, and Zhang Wei Li scored like 93 points in a second round submission at Carlos Esparza. That was the one time where he got left out, and it was because neither guy went off, and then we had a bunch of other fighters on the slate score well. So I mean, theoretically, it actually makes it, at least looking at that, less likely to have two, just because you have so many fighters that can score well and can outscore them on the slate. But yeah, I mean, on a larger card, we're less worried about dupes also. So I think you are more flexible with your approach, and I wouldn't be as worried about getting a highly duped lineup unless you go like favorite, and then jam in, two more high-owned plays. That's what you really want to avoid on this slate.
Absolutely. And for some of those 2 5-round cards with 14 fights or even 13 fights, sometimes 15 fights, we've had these where generally if we're looking to play 0 or maybe 1, we can identify one that's pretty low volume, right? The Adesanya Pereira fight sticks out as one that's seems like an obvious one to be left out. And then you can get some luck with the other one being an ill-timed finish or just getting outscored, like the Zhang Wei Li fight. And on this card, we can start the main event breakdowns now, Jake. Right, Saint-Denis Poirier seems like an absolute explosion for DFS. Our model would indicate that, given their combined OF index is like 300 plus. Whereas the O'Malley Vera one, despite it being the better low risk stack of the 2 fights, could be the one that gets left out. So, is 0 going to happen? Probably not, just because of the Saint-Denis Poirier fight itself. Weird things have happened. Can 2 happen? Yes, potentially, especially if Vera wins. But when you have one fight that is so obvious as high scoring, it feels a lot harder for both to get left out.
Yeah, I think so too. I think for both to get left out, it would have to be like O'Malley winning the fight and not scoring super well, getting priced out, and then either Saint-Denis getting like a hyper efficient submission where very little happens, or Poirier getting completely controlled for 2 rounds and then getting like an early third round finish and having a bunch of dogs score well because he's so cheap that even with that, I mean, he doesn't need to put up a huge score in a win, but his last win, he scored like 67 points in a third round submission. So something like that would be how it happens, but it's asking a lot. Both of these fights should be some action, but yeah, I mean, we can dive right into that. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I guess let's talk about Poirier and Saint-Denis first, and we'll get into the championship fight next. So again, this is a 5-rounder. Saint-Denis, big step up in competition here. And I think everyone who's played MMA DFS, Jake, knows, and it's clear by his ownership and just looking at his fight logs, everyone knows he can score incredibly. I know you wrote in your write-ups, he's averaged over 120 points in his 5 UFC wins. And we expect him to be the highest owned fighter once again on this card. Our model has him with an OF index of 198, which is one of the highest you'll ever see. Up-tempo matchup. So your thoughts? Does he get it done? Does he score well? How does Poirier win? How does it fit in the DFS?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good matchup for Saint-Denis. He's a grappler. Well, he comes from a grappling base. He'll stand and brawl too, but that's where we've really seen Poirier struggle, is against grapplers, getting his back taken, getting choked out. And Saint-Denis is really good on the mat. 28-year-old French guy. He was like the Green Beret or whatever, like insane toughness that we saw in his debut at 170 pounds, where he just got like the life beaten out of him at a higher weight class. Didn't like quit. The ref let the fight go on, and then since then he's finished 5 straight opponents in the second round. So I mean, I think some people see the fight, they see Saint-Denis as a negative 210 favorite, and they're like, wow, Dustin Poirier is a big plus 170 underdog. Like, we're so used to Poirier being the favorite in most all of his fights. But the guy's 35 years old now. He's coming off like a kind of a bad knockout loss to Gagey. He hasn't been very active lately. Kind of been flirting with the idea of retirement. Like, even going back to the Conor McGregor fights, he was talking about like, I don't love this anymore. Like, he's got the hot sauce. He's doing charity work. Like, kind of seems like fighting is sort of like an afterthought for him at this point. But who knows? I mean, maybe he'll bounce back. It's just he's lost 2 of his last 3 fights. He's been finished in his last 5 losses. It seems like they're using Poirier to build up Saint-Denis here, who Saint-Denis is like an up-and-coming, star. He's bringing in the French crowd. I mean, he's big at 155. He had been fighting at 165 and even some at 170 earlier in his career. So, I mean, he's got the size, the athleticism, the style. He's got everything that they want. But, I mean, this is the first 5-round fight of Saint-Denis' career. And we do still have some question marks surrounding both his cardio and durability. I mean, he's pretty hittable, but he's just like insanely tough. But we also don't really know how good his cardio is. Like, I felt like he was kind of slowing down late in the second round of the Thiago fight, where he got the finish, but it was kind of concerning. Like, is he gonna be able to keep going at this crazy pace in the third round? And maybe he can. I mean, the guy's just crazy tough. Maybe he can fight through being exhausted, but we don't know the answer yet. And he's never been in a fight that made it past the third round. He's barely even seen the third round in his career. So obviously, it's a good test. Poirier has tons of 5-round experience. And if the fight does make it to the back half, I do think it favors Poirier at that point, but it's going to be a challenge for him to make it that far just based on how dangerous and explosive Saint-Denis has been. And we don't know the full decline of Poirier, but I didn't think he looked good in the Gaethje fight in the last go-around. And I mean, I'm not just saying that because he got knocked out. Like, even before that, I didn't think he was looking good there. He didn't look good for most of the Michael Chandler fight. He looked pretty good against Charles Oliveira in the first round, but then didn't look good after that. So his last 3 fights, like, have been pretty concerning, and he's been really inactive. And then he had the McGregor fights that he won both of them, but neither of those were very long, and McGregor was coming off long layoffs. So I mean, he's kind of been picking and choosing his fights, and I think he's 4-3 in his last 7. It just seems like fighting on UFC 299, maybe he retires with a loss here, maybe not. A lot of people are talking. I thought that before I heard people talking about it, and the more people talk about it, the less I think it actually happens now.
That's
but
the,
it
that's the
definitely
anti-bias bias in you, Jake. The
it is the anti-bias bias, man. As soon as everyone's talking about it, I was like, oh, it's definitely not happening anymore. Like, I thought I had a hot take at the beginning of the week. Nope, everyone's saying it. So he could be on his way down. I mean, he trains in Florida. He should have the home crowd behind him. Although, man, I think everyone that watches Saint-Denis, they're going to get excited about. So I don't know if people are going to actually be booing Saint-Denis, but, you know, Poirier's from Louisiana, trains in Florida. Maybe the crowd will be behind him. Should be a really good fight. We could see Saint-Denis get an early submission, probably the most likely outcome. We could see him gassed out and Poirier take over later in the fight. So both guys have good upside. And like we sort of touched on earlier, like if Poirier does get controlled early and then comes back later in the fight to find a finish, maybe that doesn't put up a huge score, but it could probably still be enough at his price tag. And just the up-tempo nature of this matchup makes it way harder for it to bust, because we should see good striking volume in addition to grappling. And when we can get the combination of the two, I mean, that's just the perfect recipe for a scoring explosion. And yeah, I mean, Saint-Denis, huge upside, Poirier, cheap price tag. So gotta think both guys are live here for whoever wins.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, this is the perfect type of matchup for the UFC, where Saint-Denis up and comer. And if you're not watching these cards every single fight, you may not know the extent of Saint-Denis' upside, and the average fan will see Poirier and you just look on Twitter, like, wow, Poirier's a dog against this guy who I haven't seen much of. And a lot of people were taking Poirier, where if and probably when Saint-Denis wins, it just explodes him into superstardom because he beat Poirier despite him being, you know, in the back half of his career. Now, for low risk contests, this seems like because it is favored to end early and Poirier is likely to lose, that you just play Saint-Denis and you stack the other fight in O'Malley and Vera. Obviously on DraftKings, does it change on FanDuel at all? Because I know they, like the last time there was a couple 5-rounders, they actually didn't price this fight as a 5-round fight on FanDuel.
Yeah, they actually did the same thing again. So the combined salary of these two is only $31, whereas the main event is $37. So yeah, I do think on FanDuel you do the same thing as the UFC Mexico card, where you actually stack this one just based on price. Because I mean, it's not going to completely kill you if Saint-Denis gets the early finish and Poirier doesn't score well, because that's going to mean Saint-Denis is probably going to explode. And if the fight does last longer, they both should have pretty high floors just based on the volume. So yeah, I do think on FanDuel you're stacking this one. On DraftKings you're stacking the other one. I was playing around early in the week with playing both dogs in Saint-Denis, but ultimately came to the conclusion that Poirier is the one you want to leave out of the 4 in low risk on DraftKings.
Fair enough. And for those who aren't familiar with our terminology at Occupy Fantasy, low risk contests, 50-50s, double ups, head to heads. You just have to beat half the field to double your money. Stacking is not a strategy that we're advocating for in small field GPPs or large field GPPs. Shout out to John Cotter in the chat, says best MMA DFS show on the web. We appreciate you, John. Your check is in the mail for saying that. Thank you, sir. He said, looking at Jake's sheet, which by the way, you can get at MMADFS.com, where he writes up every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective, and has some visuals on line movement as well. He says, looking at your sheet, Jake, it doesn't look like there's much line movement on this card as any other card recently. Is that because the veteran fighters equal sharper lines? Are you surprised that there's not much line movement, whether it's for the card in general or a specific fight? And I'll answer Jake, generally, when there are more known quantities, it's easier to make a line. When you have more unknown factors, that's when you can see a worse opener and more money being bet to move that line around. Whereas on this card, we have all veterans. Everyone pretty much knows who should be the favorite, who should be the underdog.
Yeah, and I'll also add that on pay-per-view cards, these lines have been out for much longer.
True.
So I'm locking the odds Monday morning around the time DraftKings releases pricing to help us show mispricing. So a lot of these lines, they might have moved weeks ago.
True. That's a good point. That is a very good point. So, all right, let's move on to O'Malley and Cheeto Vera. And again, if you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We'll answer them along the way. O'Malley, coming off the Aljo knockout, Jake, he is the favorite here, 9,200 on DraftKings. How do you see this fight playing out? O'Malley we have as one of the top 3 most popular fighters on the card. Talk to me about the DFS implications.
Yeah, so O'Malley coming in, 29 years old, negative 275 favorite, tall, rangy, fast striker, still questionable durability, multiple injuries in the past. And I'd say questionable cardio and questionable grappling as well. Has never been past the 3rd round in his career. Obviously a concern going into a 5-round fight. His last fight was the first 5-round fight he even ever prepared for, and he won in the 2nd round TKO. So it just shows he hasn't even been training for 5-round fights outside of that one time. He got finished, obviously, by Marlon Vera back in 2020 with the round 1 leg injury where he got kicked in the peroneal nerve. O'Malley's like, it wasn't a loss. Like, all right, well, it was the leg kick TKO, basically. But one thing I thought was interesting with O'Malley is he averages 7.25 significant strikes landed per minute in the UFC, but so much that was padded early in his career. Since he started facing ranked opponents, that number drops down to 4.62 significant strikes landed per minute. Much less impressive. And he also doesn't have anything in terms of wrestling. 0 takedowns on just 1 attempt in his last 10 fights. So he relies entirely on his striking, and we've seen that volume come way down since his opponent level of competition has gone up, which makes it tougher for him to return value at his high price tag. I mean, the guy's super expensive. He's $9,200 on DraftKings, and $23, the most expensive on FanDuel. There's lots of ways to see him get priced out. If he's relying on a knockout, it's going to be tough here. Vera's never been finished in his career, has never even been knocked down in 22 UFC fights, which basically leaves O'Malley more likely to be reliant on putting just an insane striking total to score well in a decision, which is possible. I mean, if you look at Vera's stats, he averages 5.16 significant strikes absorbed per minute, 3rd most on the slate. We saw Rob Font land the 3rd most strikes in UFC history on Marlon Vera, and still lose the fight because Vera was doing so much damage in that fight. And that was an absolutely crazy fight. I don't think that Sean O'Malley will come in with the Rob Font approach of just standing in front of him and jabbing all day. I think O'Malley's going to have a lot more footwork, a lot more movement, which makes it a lot harder for him to put up this astronomical striking total where he can still put up a huge score in a decision. So I think it's a pretty easy decision to look at O'Malley, look at his ownership, look at the ways he scores well, and look at the matchup and say, okay, well, this is the guy that I'm going to fade or be underweight on because it's so much harder for him to get in the winner, even if he wins. I'm actually picking Vera to lose, but even if O'Malley wins, it's hard for him to get in the winner, and I don't think he wins. I think Marlon Vera is coming in. He's more dangerous, more durable, more experienced, better cardio, more well-rounded, better grappler, better wrestler. I mean, he pretty much has O'Malley outmatched everywhere except for length, quickness. Like, I think, neither guy I don't think is the most powerful in the world. Maybe you give the advantage to O'Malley. Vera's more of a war of attrition type guy, but I've seen Vera kick enough guys in the face to knock him out to know that he has the ability to knock people out, even if a lot of the times his fights are running longer. He is a plus 220 underdog. Obviously, you have to consider that. He's got like a 30% implied chance to win here. So it's hard to go all in on a guy like that. I mean, typically when you go all in on a dog, it fails more often than succeeds, at least from my own personal experience. But at the same time, I'm tempted here, man, just based on Vera's durability and he's shown that he can go 5 rounds in a war. If he can go 5 rounds, assuming he doesn't get finished for the first time in his career, he's not going to completely kill you at $7K and $14 on FanDuel, even in a loss. Like, yes, you're not going to win with him in a loss. Don't get me wrong. But if he scores 50 points, it's not like, I just got a dog that scored 0 and I'm going to return $0 on the slate. So he does have a good floor. Although O'Malley just circles outside the octagon and tries to snipe him from distance for 25 minutes. And that would be a disaster for DFS. I don't know if that's going to happen. O'Malley claims he's going to try to knock him out. Obviously, these two have history and some bad blood. So I think we're going to see a decent fight. But I do think that O'Malley is going to try to control the distance and use his range to try to piece Vera up. And Vera generally doesn't wrestle a ton, even though he's a black belt and he can grapple. He's typically not looking to wrestle that much. So both guys are probably just going to be relying on their striking, and it's going to be Vera trying to do more damage and test the durability of O'Malley, land the leg kick, slow him down, and probably to try to get a late finish or squeak out a close decision, which it's always hard to win a decision against the champ because you have to basically make it decisive. And, you're going to hear everyone say Vera's a slow starter, so he may start, around in the hole. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, O'Malley's been starting pretty slow lately. Right. Like in his last few fights, he hasn't been putting up big striking totals in the first round. So we'll see. I think it's pretty open. I think if Vera does win, it's hard for him to get left out of winning DraftKings lineups based on his cheap price tag. And, he's got the finishing upside and the ability to score well in a decision. So, I mean, he could score 90 points and still get in the winner. So I think as the cheapest 5-round fighter, if he wins, he's in. I mean, I'm not playing him for a loss, and I think his win potential is higher than the actual odds imply.
Yeah, and honestly, in small field too, if he scores 45 in a loss, that's more than enough at his price tag to win small field GPPs and small field satellites. So it seems like an even better play there. Am I crazy for thinking that you can fade O'Malley in your small field GPPs as well, right? Like if, he would have to score like 120, which is in like the top 1 to 5% ranges of outcomes, and even then you can still probably, if the rest of your lineup is perfect, win a small field GPP. But more likely than not, O'Malley is scoring like 70 to 90, 70 to 100 in this matchup, and you can overcome that. And if he loses or scores in the lower end of that range, then you have a leg up on your competition, which is normally not something I'm saying about small field GPP and main event favorites.
No, I totally agree, man. I think you can fade O'Malley in all tournaments, and I think there's a lot of leverage to be gained there, assuming that he does come in around the 40%, low 40s that we haven't projected.
Cool. All right. So let's move on. Again, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. Now we'll talk about the two newcomers making their debut. Almabayev, who has less than 4 fights in the UFC, and then we'll go fight by fight, all 14. We already did 2, so we'll do all 12 of the remaining fights with a 1-sentence synopsis of the fight. We'll put. We'll see if Jake can narrow his thoughts down to 1 sentence per fight. But Jake, let's start with the earlier fight, and we'll start with Robal Despain, who is Cuban Taekwondo bronze medalist. If you've read anything about him, you know him. 4-0. Only one of his 4 fights has his opponent fought somebody else ever, and that guy was 1-0. The other 3 guys are 0-1 in their MMA career, all losses in milliseconds to Despain, and just nasty, immediate head kicks or punches. So, Jake, this is the type of guy, and I'm doing a lot of the legwork here for you, but feel free to chime in. But a guy who hasn't been past the first round. We have not seen his grappling, and we can probably be pretty sure that his grappling is not great. He's older, has faced 0 competition. However, the UFC wants him to succeed, and they've probably set him up with a great matchup here to succeed in Josh Perisian. So how do we handle Despain and his likely high ownership given his inside the distance numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on most of the key points. I mean, this guy's giant, 6'7". They're giving him Josh Perisian, who is like literally one of the worst heavyweights on the roster. So you have to assume they're trying to set him up to win. They're not giving him a tough matchup. But also, like you said, like I do think we can assume this guy can't wrestle, and we can probably assume he has terrible cardio because you'll get Taekwondo matches. Yeah, they're 3 rounds. Each round's 2 minutes. So that's like 1 round, basically, of MMA. So I would be shocked if this guy didn't gas out midway through round 2 if we get that far. But I do think it's a teed up matchup for him to get a finish. You look at Josh Parisian, he's just sloppy heavyweight, hands low, like asking to be head kicked, which is what Despain comes out with in all of his fights, is just like an immediate head kick. But if Parisian pushes him up against the fence for 5 minutes, then he could definitely wear him out, and we could open round 2 and we could have another Shamil situation where dude's just gassed and Parisian can just use his experience. But I also think there's tons of upside. I mean, you mentioned the 3 straight wins in like 12 seconds or less. Obviously, the quick win bonus is in play. It almost seems too obvious, but you look at the DraftKings odds, and I think it's plus 350 to end in the opening minute. That implies like a 22% chance, and I didn't take the juice out, so probably closer to like 16 or 17% chance that he actually gets the quick win bonus, and he's going to be owned double that, basically, maybe higher on DraftKings. So if you can get out of the first minute, it's not a guarantee he's not going to end up in the winner, because maybe he does throw a little more volume. He gets a late first round finish. But if the fight makes it past round 1, you have to imagine that he's not going to be in the winner at his price tag. He's just not going to do enough. And at that point, he might not even win the fight.
Right.
So
totally. I mean,
he is negative.
He's like the easiest fade ever if there was not a quick win bonus.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, he's negative 200 to get a first round finish, and negative 300 for inside the distance, which are both the biggest on the slate, which is why, he'll carry a decent amount of ownership. But I do sort of wonder, like, are we going to get a group think where everyone ends up being on Perisian, and we see Despang end up coming in lower just because everyone's like, oh, well, he's never fought anyone. He's going to gas out. He needs a quick win bonus. Like, could he randomly come in and at 28% owned just because everyone has the same idea? They're like, oh, this is the guy I'm going to fade because I need Parisian to survive a minute. I'm not saying that happens. I'm just saying I wouldn't be completely shocked if he ended up being lower owned than expected. But I could also see him being 45% owned because everyone's like, Parisian sucks. So I think it's a volatile matchup, volatile ownership, where it makes it harder to take a stand and feel good about it. If you fade him, that's going to be the toughest minute of your life.
Yeah. I mean, I just think he ends up on the higher end because you look at the inside the distance numbers, and most people are looking at that anyways. And I just think so. So, somewhat related in this price range, Mr. Grapefruit in the chat says, I'm not sure who is favorite, O'Malley over Gamrot. I assume he means in DFS. But Jake, we have O'Malley at 40% plus ownership on DraftKings and Gamrot basically at 20. So 5-round fight. People are going to play O'Malley over Gamrot, especially with the price savings.
Yeah, man, I really like Gamrot here at his lower ownership and really high floor. And I think he has a sneaky high ceiling against an old veteran in the 39-year-old RDA who's cutting down 15 pounds, which we don't know how that's necessarily going to go. It could affect his chin. The guy's already been knocked out 4 times. So, yeah, I like Gamrot way more than O'Malley on this card.
You already used your one sentence on that fight, so we might have to remove that from the 12-fight discussion here in the next segment. Next, we have the other fighter making their debut, and it is not your typical debut fighter. It is Michael Venom Page coming over from Bellator. A slew of fights, 20-plus professional fights, tons of tape, easy to find, higher level competition. I won't say high, I will say higher level than your typical debuting fighter. And relative coin flip matchup here against Kevin Holland. So, Jay, you and I both picked up very quickly. And again, if you're an MMA fan in general, if you don't just play DFS and you play MMA DFS, but if you're an actual fan of mixed martial arts, which I will not pretend to be, you know Michael Page, you've seen his knockouts, you know what type of fighter he is. But Jake, when you and I were watching him, charting him for this slate, very clear low volume guy. And of course, our question is, how does he end up in the winning lineup? Given, I mean, this is some of the lowest volume I've seen since we've charted any fighter, let alone a veteran guy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, especially, for a non-grappler. Like, maybe you find a smothering grappler that's not playing up volume, but this guy doesn't grapple at all and just doesn't land any strikes. He turns 37 in a month. He had a bare knuckle boxing match before his last fight against Mike Perry. It seems like he's sort of making the rounds at the end of his career to do some cash grabs. But I mean, he's claiming he's here for the belt. Yeah, good luck. He's talking about fighting Leon Edwards. That would be the most boring fight of all time. But he's coming in 21-2 with 16 finishes. So obviously he does have power. If he only lands 10 strikes in a fight, but one of them knocks you out with a head kick, then he's going to end up with a finish. But if he doesn't get the finish and he's going to score insanely poorly in DFS, I mean, even with a later round finish, he's going to score terribly because he's not landing any volume. Unless he can get an opponent that just sprints straight at him for the entire fight to force him to throw. And even then he'd probably just circle away and faint at you. Yeah, man, it's the worst possible style for DFS. And I think he's going to be reliant on landing first round knockouts to ever score well. He's fighting Kevin Holland, who's insanely durable. The only TKO loss of his career was against Stephen Thompson from that broken arm where it was like a post round 4 TKO. I mean, I don't really hold that against Holland. It's not like he got knocked out. It was just all right, well, the fight can't continue because his arm snapped and he just fought 3 rounds on it. But yeah, I mean, Page, like you said, 10-year career with Bellator. So like he's been around for a long time and he does throw good kicks. He's got good speed. So I think there will be some matchups where like, okay, he can get a knockout here, but this is a terrible matchup for him. Yeah, he's going to need a complete Hail Mary knockout of Kevin Holland early to be useful in DFS. So I don't have much interest in playing him.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if Holland was interested in actually winning every fight he fought, he would just grapple him immediately because you look at past few fights and it's a very clear path to victory against Page. However, Jake, I think you and I both know that will not be the case. And that's probably also not the case for path of least resistance for another intriguing fight on this card in Curtis Blades versus Jailton Almeida.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. Some of these guys that they just refuse to take the path of least resistance. Like Holland likes to fight guys where they're the strongest. He made that deal not to land takedowns against Stephen Thompson. I mean, Holland's an entertaining guy, but it can also be frustrating if you're trying to back him and he just refuses to, take advantage of favorable situations.
All right, let's move on and let's talk about the highest priced fighter on the card. This is good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Generally, this is reserved for the slew of fighters that have less than 5 UFC fights on their resume, and we give some context to their stats. We only have one. It's Asu Amabayev, who is the largest favorite on the card against CJ Vergara here. So Amabayev, Jake, just briefly, is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against CJ Vergara?
Yeah, he's good, man. Really smothering wrestler, great top control, really efficient with landing takedowns, and it's a good matchup. Vergara's been subbed twice before, including by Tyra in the UFC. Vergara missed weight by a pound, one-dimensional striker, good fighter, good matchup.
All right. Guys, if you have questions, let's throw them in the chat. We'll be here for another 15 minutes or so at the most. So any questions, throw them in the chat, and we will answer them along the way. There's a great time before we start to break down every fight with a brief synopsis to go check out MMADFS.com. That is Jake's site where he has the sheet every single week, betting and DFS premium content. MMADFS.com is where you can get that. And then OccupyFantasy.com, which is where I'm from. We have our daily plug that Jake writes. We have our Occupy model, which ranks every fighter on FanDuel and DraftKings with projected ownership, and our lineup builder that allows you to build up to 300 UFC DFS lineups using custom rules and our projections. So make sure you check that out if you want the extra edge beyond these videos. All the links are in the description below. All right, we'll start from the first fight of the night to the last fight of the night. Jake, I'm begging you, 1 sentence per fight. We'll see if we can get this done. I kind of want to frame this as what has to happen for the fight to score well. I don't know. I'm trying to make this a DFS-specific synopsis. Give me your 1-sentence DFS rundown for each fight. And we'll start with Marina Moroz, Joanne Wood, the first fight of the night.
Yeah, Moroz has a ton of sub potential in a high-volume fight. Obviously, upside if she gets the sub, and Wood has a crazy striking volume upside. So if she wins, it's probably a high-scoring decision.
All right, we'll be generous with the punctuation there and count that as 1 sentence. We talked about Amabayev and Vergara here. Just really quickly, any interest in Vergara is 6,700 as the cheapest fighter on the card?
No.
Okay. All right. We've talked about the Spain and Parisian. Do you want to expand on that any at all? We've talked about the Spain likely early gas tank, Parisian. I mean, here's my question to you, right? Can you play Parisian in small field GPPs? Because if he wins, you open up a lot, but there's also a very good chance he scores 0 points.
I mean, I have a very high risk tolerance. I think you could play him in any tournaments, basically, as long as they're not like 10-person tournaments.
All right. That's fair. All right. Next, we have Michał Oleksiejczuk and Michel Pereira. Jesus, the pronunciations here. 1-sentence synopsis here.
Yeah, I mean, upside on both sides. Pereira sub or Oleg early knockout. And if neither of those happen, then the fight will bust.
That sounds about right. Next, we have the fight that you were most concerned about on the entire card is Ivan Cutelaba and Felipe Lins.
Yeah, this fight got canceled mid-card the last time it was booked. It's rebooked now. Lins has pulled out of 2 fights mid-card and a dozen fights before they started. So obviously there has to be some level of concern. This almost feels like a 3-way bet. Like, who wins, Cutelaba, Lins, or the fight doesn't happen? Cutelaba, clearly massive upside. Lins, upside based on the fact that Cutelaba gasses out in round 2 normally and often gets finished when he does.
All right, you're playing a single entry, 100-player small field GPP. Are you fading, playing Cutelaba, or are you playing Lins? Yeah, now we got a good question.
Yeah, That's hard, man. Probably fading, but man, I think it's like, 40% chance that's the best move, like 35% chance that Kudalaba is the best move, and like 25% chance that the best move. It's really tough
It
what
is.
you do with one entry on that fight.
It's really tough. Ideally, you just have three and you play 1-1-0.
Right, right.
All right, so there's your recommendation to play three small field lineups for this slate. Next, a fight that I really haven't seen much about, just looking around the industry, and doesn't seem too exciting. Our OF Index is not really excited about this fight, but Kyler Phillips and Pedro Munoz.
Yeah, I mean, Phillips, round one or bust, and Munoz has never been finished in his career. So tough matchup for Phillips. I mean, I don't want to go past the sentence, so no punctuation. Phillips wins round two, wins the first 3 minutes around, sorry, wins round one, wins the first 3 minutes around two, loses the last 2 minutes around two, loses round three, wins a 29-28 close decision, scores like 70 points.
That's very specific. I like that. All right, next we've talked about Gamrot and Dos Anjos here. Rafael Dos Anjos. I know you mentioned Gamrot is sneaky here. We'd like the lower ownership, obviously. Is there a chance we see Dos Anjos higher owned than Gamrot here?
Yeah, for sure, man. Just based on price, it's hard to know where these guys will come in because Gamrot should be higher owned, but I think people will chase RDA's cheap price tag. Anytime RDA is like old, and I mean Gamrot's known for controlling guys and has never been finished, so it's a tricky one to predict ownership. I think it's a little bit volatile. Where we're probably on the high range of Gamrot and the low range of RDA here, so it wouldn't be surprising if Gamrot was like 17 or 18%, and RDA was like 24%, just based on the price and the fact that RDA has been in a million 5 round fights, so he put up a bunch of big scores.
True, true, true. Okay. Next we have formerly Caitlin Chukagian. She's now Caitlin Serminara and Macy Barber.
Yeah, they're both going to be low owned, but man, I think it's going to be a lower volume decision. Probably pretty close. I think Sermonara can actually win it just based on her length. I mean, I want to. We need to get the GIF of Macy Barber jabbing from 25 feet away in Alexa Grasso. I know she's gotten better since then, but distance control is not Macy Barber's thing, and it is Caitlin Sermonara's thing. So, despite the media day interview, I'm still on Sermonara winning a close decision probably here, but not much interest in DFS on either side.
Based on price tags and ownership, Serminara much more likely to be an optimal than Macy Barber.
God, she just can't score well. Like if we had a slate where not many dogs were projected to win, I would say yes. But we have so many dogs that can win and so many high upside dogs that I think the odds of Sermonara winning are pretty likely. The odds of her making the optimal lineup with a 70-point win or whatever she's going to do are pretty low.
That's fair.
But
That's
maybe
certainly
in
fair.
small field, I think you can play her.
Okay. 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 Next, we get to an exciting matchup: Curtis Blades, Jailton Almeida.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most exciting fights on the card, obviously opening up the pay-per-view. It was supposed to be a main event, I think last November, and then Blades dropped out with an ankle injury. So obviously a really hyped up fight, and I think a really interesting fight that everyone wants to see both these guys tested against another heavyweight wrestler because they really haven't been. So pretty volatile matchup, but I do wonder about Curtis Blades' defensive wrestling. I know it hasn't really been tested. When it was earlier in his career, it did not hold up. Almeida is just like such a freak of nature, man. I don't think Blades will look good off his back, and I do think Almeida gets him down and subs him.
It's just hard to trust Blades at this point, right? Obviously very talented, but as I told you earlier in the week, if we can expect Blades to have the suboptimal game plan, we can probably expect him to pull guard here. And I think it's the best move. All right, moving on to the main card here. Just really quickly, let's interrupt here. Samuel in the chat. What's up, Samuel? Any strategies for captain mode? So this applies to FanDuel as well, obviously, as they have the MVP multiplier. Captain mode on DraftKings is a much smaller slate. But Jake, I think, and obviously you can chime in here. DraftKings, you do have the salary multiplier, which makes it a little bit easier to play cheaper guys. They don't have to necessarily be the highest scorer on the card. But on both sites, if you're playing tournaments, the number one way to get different while retaining upside is playing lower owned captain or MVP choices that are going to score well in the win. That generally means underdogs, but it could just mean lower owned favorites as well. Jake, any other higher level FanDuel or captain mode on DraftKings strategy that Samuel should know?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you said, but yeah, I would avoid playing, like guys like Sean O'Malley, guys that probably not going to lead the slate in scoring. They're going to be the highest owned, and they're super expensive. I mean, just avoid like the main event favorite in general. And then, yeah, find some guys that are like the second tier of ownership that still have the same upside, that maybe their win percentage is lower, but when they win, they're going to score just as well, if not more, than the guys that are twice, three times as owned.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great synopsis there. All right, on the main card, once we get into the 5 rounders, it will be super exciting, I think. Maybe not. Well, the only one I think that's going to buck what I'm about to say, Jake, is Sani and Poirier, where most of the main event are going to be better real-life fights than DFS fights. Do you disagree?
No, I think so for sure. I mean, I think Yan Song is the perfect example of that. Like this could be a main event on most cards,
Yeah.
and on this card, it's like, oh, like this is going to be one of the lowest scoring like DFS fights, like at least the way it projects.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think you push the ownership down to sub 20% for both of these guys, which is pretty rare considering they're in that nicer price tier of 8,300, 7,900. But again, hard to see how either one scores well outside of an early knockout. And then we have Della Maddalena. I mean, one of the biggest themes of the card is guys taking a jump. Della Maddalena now jumping up to Gilbert Burns here. 1 cent synopsis for this one.
I mean, if you barely make it by Basil Hafez, who took his debut on short notice, it's much harder to see you finding a ton of success against Gilbert Burns. Maybe that's a trap. Maybe Burns is getting washed up at this point, 37 years old, coming off a shoulder surgery. But I think you have to approach the fight looking at it like this guy struggled against Hafez. Burns should be able to find grappling success, and generally is smart enough to use it when he has favorable matchups.
Exactly. All right, and we've talked about Holland and Page, so we've talked about every single fight. If you guys have any more specific questions, throw them in the chat. Instead, we will close out the show with the fight that you have to target, Underdog Fantasy Play of the Week, and our stream parlay of the slate. We'll start with Underdog Fantasy. Reminder, if you're not already, you can sign up with promo code OCCUPY, get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. We're doing best ball streams for football all spring, winter, and summer long. So you can use your deposit bonus for that. You can use it for any sort of pick'em contest. Jake, did any line on Underdog Fantasy stick out to you this week for the slate?
Yeah, I think Michael Page under 58.5 significant strikes is pretty solid, considering he normally lands like single digit or 10 significant strikes. He would have to go insanely over his average.
Fair enough. I like that one a lot myself. All right, fight that you have to target in DFS. We've talked about every single fight. Let's leave the 5 rounders out of this equation. You're going to give us a sneaky one, or are you going to give us an obvious one for a fight that whoever wins is likely to be in the optimal lineup on DraftKings?
We're going with the sneakiest one on the slate here. We're going Mariana Moroz versus Joanne Wood. Joanne Wood already announced her retirement. She's already been submitted once by Moroz. 5 of her 8 UFC losses have come by first-round submission. I think Moroz has massive sub potential here, and you just hope it's not like their first fight where she pulled guard and got an armbar and scored 95. Like, let's get some striking volume and ideally a late first-round finish. Moroz could absolutely go crazy. And if she doesn't, and we see a pure striking battle, Joanne Wood does nothing but score well in decisions when she wins. So we just need to avoid a lower scoring Moroz decision, basically.
Easy enough. And I mean, talk about competing narratives here with retirement fight versus OnlyFans model. Like the system breaks when that matches up, Jake.
Yeah, man, it's pretty crazy. Like generally, we're looking to fade both those narratives, so hopefully it's not a double bust. But man, I didn't even bring up the ownership. The ownership is crazy. Moroz is like single-digit projected ownership, and Wood is like 16% right now. I mean, and it's the first fight on the card, which I'm not saying like I target that or anything, but you can't tell me it's not a better feeling when the first fight goes off and you're looking down and you're in first in all your contests immediately, and then you get to actually sweat the rest of the card.
Yeah.
Trying to hang on to money opposed to sitting on $0 and hoping that you later catch up. And I mean, I would never target that, but I'm just saying, like, that's a bonus.
Yeah, if you're looking for a tiebreaker, the ownership should be enough, though. I think we have 25 or 30% combined ownership for DraftKings for these two. Definitely a fight to target. All right, we'll close out with our stream parlay of the week. I pick a side, total, or prop. Jake does as well. We parlay together. We buy a car when we win. And Jake, given your love for Vera, I think this line makes a lot of sense. It is a FanDuel specific play. If you don't have access to FanDuel Sportsbook, you can play various iterations of this prop. But I'm going to go Cheeto Vera round 4, round 5, or decision for my leg of the stream parlay. And I think last we checked it was plus 420 or plus 440.
Yeah, it's plus 420. Yeah, man. I mean, I think that covers, the vast majority of his win conditions. You just need to avoid an early knockout. And I think his money line is like plus 210 now or something. Like, I think I got it earlier in the week, like plus 230. It was actually plus 240 at ESPN bet, although I try not to use that as like a source just because they're such a joke book. But occasionally they'll have a line. I'll pair that with.
No, go for it, Jake. I was just going to say we are not partnered with ESPN Bet Sportsbook, so we're free to say however we feel about them.
I mean, I normally say however I feel about anything, so I'm surprised I'm not canceled yet. But I'm gonna go Pereira sub at plus 550. And if you want to make that more risky, you could go Pereira round 2, round 3 sub. If you want to make it less risky, you can go Pereira decision or sub. We decided to go right in the middle. So Pereira sub plus 550. If we parlay those together, it's plus 3280. I did hit the plug parlay last week at plus 3,800. Nice little 38-1 action. So let's keep it going this week.
Yeah, we got the fortunate doctor's stoppage on our side. It was Rose in round 2, 3, or 4. So 38-1. So make sure you check out this week's plug parlay and all of Jake's bets at MMADFS.com. And again, OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get the plug, model, and lineup builder. We appreciate every one of you watching these shows every week for free. If you want to support us in the simplest way, you can just subscribe to the channel. It is free to do so. It's mutually beneficial. We get more subscribers. You get notified when we go live or upload any videos. We do these videos every time there are 12 fights on a card or it's pay-per-view. And sometimes it's Friday night, sometimes it's Saturday morning. Subscribing is the best way to get notified which one it'll be. Give us a thumbs up, another easy way to support. And if you want that extra edge, then consider subscribing to one or both of our sites. That is the ultimate way to support the channel and keep these videos going. So for Jake, at DFS_MMA, I'm at Brian Jester FF. Thank you for listening. As always, good luck and mostly enjoy UFC 299.